Welcome back again, class. Thank you for joining me for our day 2 notes of factoring all of these expressions. Now, today we're going to look at slightly more complicated cases. It's still exactly the same setup and same process. However, this time when we're factoring something, that a term is not going to be 1 anymore, which is going to put slight differences in how we look at these problems. So, when we're looking at this, let's focus on the 3x squared plus 13x plus 4. So this is still the reverse of FOILing. We're still going to start with that first term, the 3x squared. But now we need to consider, how do we get 3x squared? Well, this time, the 3x squared is coming from multiplying the 3x and x, okay? So the 3x squared is still coming from the first terms of our two binomials. However, this time it's 3x and x. Now, our next focus is still going to be on that last number, that 4, because that 4 is coming from the L of FOILing, those last terms. And again, we have a couple options here. 4 could come from 1 times 4 or 2 times 2. The way we determine which is which is that middle term, that 13x. Okay? Now, again, here you have to consider that this is piecing together a puzzle. So it's today that is very, very critical that you understand those connections from the inside and the outside parts of FOILing. Because to choose the right combination, you'll have to make those green connections to get the 1x and then multiply the 3x and the 4 to get 12x, because it's those connections that give you that 13x that you know you're looking for. Today, when there is an a value, it is not as easy as just multiplying to 4, adding the 13. It doesn't work that simply this time, okay? So, just make sure that we're clear. Think of today even more as a puzzle, because you can't just multiply and add. Now you really, really have to show those connections. That's why I showed you that way in the previous notes, in order to see how to get that middle term. So, let's dive right into our first example. So, I want to set up my structure. So, 2x squared. Where does 2x squared come from? Well, 2x squared, this time one of our x's is going to have a 2 with it. 2x and x. Next up, we need to focus on the 12. Okay, so 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. So those are going to be the combinations that multiply to 12. And now we have to begin to look. How can we put these together to get that 11x? All right, so I'm going to begin my search. Now, this is where, again, it's a little less obvious. So sometimes you really have to just start putting in numbers and seeing if you can get it to work out. So I'm going to begin with the 1 and the 12. So here I get 1x and I get 24x. And I notice that does not give me the 11x that I'm looking for. So what that means is that is not going to be the option that I want. Okay? So a lot of this is just working on getting the pieces together in the right way. Now that was not the right way. So I'm going to reverse those two numbers. In this case, you always have to try the reverse now, because notice that does make a difference. I have 12x, and I have 2x here when I make those connections. Well, that is giving me 14x, still not the 11x that I'm looking for. So now that I've tried both of those, That means I have exhausted the 1 and the 12. Now, here's another little helpful hint, the way that I go about doing this, to reduce the options that you have to check. Notice this 11x. We are shooting for an odd number inside there, okay? We want 11x. So, little helpful hint for you to reduce the amount of work you need to do. Two even factors like that, 2 and 6, two even factors will never give you an odd number. Okay, so I'm going to rule those out right away. No matter how you fit this together, you will never get an odd number in there. So just ignore it. You know that's not going to give you what you need. So instead, I'm going to focus on the 3 and the 4. I'm going to move down there and see what happens. So here I have 3x. 2x times 4 gives me 8x. And there we have it. There is my 11x. So that means I have the factored form now. So again, really think of these as a puzzle, fitting together in the right way. All right, moving on to the next one. How do I get 7x squared? Well, 7x squared will come from a 7x and an x. How do I get 28? Well, 28 is 1 and 28, 2 and 14, 4 and 7. The next thing that I find interesting is notice I'm multiplying to be positive and adding to be negative. So remember, we talked about that situation. When you're multiplying to be positive, yet adding to be negative, the only way that can occur is if you're working with two negative numbers, because two negative numbers will multiply to be positive. Now, as I'm looking at this, I can see that I'm shooting for an odd number. So right off the bat, I'm going to eliminate the 2 and the 14. And so now, let's begin working with these numbers. So 1 and 28. So I'm getting a negative 1x, and then that is giving me a really big number, 7 times 28. That outside connection is giving me a negative 196x. Clearly, without even looking, we can see that is not going to be what we're looking for. That is not going to give us the negative 53. So let's try another one. Let's reverse that. Negative 28, negative 1. You can probably see this is still not going to give us what we want, but I want you to understand that this is a process. And again, you can probably see even by flipping those, negative 28x and negative 7x do not add to give you the negative 53x. So I've tried those numbers in both directions and they did not work. So I'm going to rule out 1 and 28. So I'm going to jump down to the 4 and the 7 now. So this gives me negative 4x. That gives me negative 49x. All right, negative 4x minus 49x. Hey, that actually does give me the negative 53x that I'm looking for. So that ends up being my actual factored form. All right, looking at our next example. Again, I always like to start with my structure. 3x squared. How do we get 3x squared? That's going to be 3x and x. How do I get 5? Well, that's nice and easy too. It's just going to be 1 and 5. Now, recall, we are multiplying to be negative here. Okay, notice that negative sign right there. So what that means is when I'm putting these combinations together, that means that one of my combinations is going to be negative. So when I plug in my 1 and my 5, I look at my connections, 1x and 15x. Now, keeping in mind, even when I make one of those negative, is it possible for me to get a negative 2x? The answer is no, because I'm either going to get 14x if the 1x is negative, or negative 14x if the 15x is negative. Neither way is it going to give me that negative 2x that I'm looking for. So what that's telling me is this is not the combination that I'm looking for. So when you try it out and it's not the combination you're looking for, remember the first thing we do is we reverse the numbers. So I'm going to reverse the 1 and the 5. So I can try 5x there, 3x here. And now keeping in mind, if I make one of those negative, can I get a negative 2x? The answer is yes. If I have a negative 5x there, that will give me a negative 2x. So I follow that. So that means that must be negative, that must be positive, and that gets me my factored form. All right, our last example. So I go to set up my structure. Now, something you may notice, this time 6x squared. This time there are actually multiple ways we can do this, okay? You can have 2x and 3x, or you can have 6x and x. So sometimes there is a possibility that there's going to be multiple possible structures based on that squared term. What that means is you have to try both of them out. Now, looking at our 15, we have 1 and 15, 3 and 5. Now, I'm going to check everything in that structure first, then transition. If nothing works, then I will move down to test out that structure. That's my personal preference. If you have a different order that you want to try these numbers out in, that is perfectly all right. Just my personal preference, I'm going to try one structure completely first. If I can't get that to work, then I'll move on into the next structure. See if I can get that one to work. Now, next thing that I'm going to keep in mind is I'm multiplying to be a negative 15. So as I'm making these connections, I need to recall one of the numbers in the pair that I'm choosing must be negative. That's the only way that this is going to work. And then I need to keep in mind that that is a 1x there that I am looking for. So I'm going to start putting in numbers. So I'm going to put in 1 and 15. So I get 3x and I get 30x. So even if I make one of those numbers negative, all that means is I'm either getting a 27x or a negative 27x. It is not giving me the 1x that I am looking for. So I'm going to rule out that and flip them. So I'm going to put the 15 there, the 1 there. So you can probably see right off the bat, this is not getting any better. 45x and 2x. Again, making one of those negative, I'm either looking at 43x or negative 43x. Either way, not the combination that I'm looking for. So the 1 and the 15 are not what I'm looking for in that case. Let's try 3 and 5. I'll move on to my next combination of numbers. So I get 9x there, and 10x there. Now this is looking a lot more promising because again, knowing one of those is going to be negative, can I get a positive 1x from that? Well, the answer is I can. If I have a negative 9x there, negative 9x plus 10x gives me 1x. So going with that, that means if I have the negative 3 and positive 5, I will get the factored form that I need. So that's why I like to test out one whole structure first, because it turns out I didn't really even have to look at that one down there. All right? That first one turned out to be exactly what I wanted. So thank you so much for joining me. Please make sure that you have all of this written down and then come back to class ready to work on our practice work.